Hi, I'm Matt Stoller, author of monopoly-focused newsletter Big, and an antitrust policy analyst. Now, I have a great segment for you today on this big breakdown. I want to talk to you today about crypto. Now, I get a lot of notes from people saying, hey, Matt, you hate monopolies, you hate corruption, you should love Bitcoin, you should love crypto. We're fighting against concentrated financial power just like you are. We're just doing it in a different way. Well, with Bitcoin prices crashing, crypto crashing, and a lot of people getting wiped out over the last 6 months, I figured now is as good a time as any to talk about it. So what is crypto? Why are so many people into it? And why is it all collapsing? I think the best way to tell the story is to start with a historical metaphor. In the early 1920s, known sometimes as the Roaring Twenties, a wave of speculation occurred around land in Florida. Now, this was just after World War I, a war that caused mass disillusionment of millions of Americans who no longer believed their government would do anything for them. There was easy money from the Federal Reserve, few rules on Wall Street, and a raging cultural war that disguised the economic choices of elites. Sounds pretty familiar. Anyway, Florida land was the perfect get-rich-quick scheme for this moment. The state of Florida looked like the future, but Florida was also far enough away from most people in the Midwest and New York that investors couldn't easily investigate their holdings. So speculators gambled massively on Florida land, and the mania became insane, just crazy. So to illustrate, there was one speculation, sort of speculative fervor over land lots in the city of Nettie, Florida. And Nettie, Florida was a city which later turned out not to exist. So eventually the bubble popped, we had a lot of tears and litigation and a Great Depression. Okay, so with that metaphor, let's talk crypto. What are cryptocurrencies? Well, cryptocurrencies are a social movement based on the belief that markings in a ledger on the internet have some sort of intrinsic value. The organizers of these ledgers call these markings Bitcoin or Ethereum or other names based on the specific ledger. The ledgers have slightly different technical characteristics, but those differences are not that important. That's it. That's what they are. There's no magic. It's not money, though it has money-like properties. And sure, the technology behind the ledgers is kind of neat. But crypto is a movement fundamentally based on energetic storytellers who spin fables about a utopian future to come and use this kind of neat ledger technology as part of that story. So perhaps the most important storyteller is crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried, one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people of 2022. He's been profiled by the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the New York Times. He intentionally has sort of crazy hair, and he wears shorts and a t-shirt to brand himself to politicians and regulators as goofy and friendly, worth between $10 and $20 billion these days. Now, that's not all. I mean, crypto is sort of sitting in a larger context. Fueling crypto is cheap money from the Federal Reserve, which has printed $8 trillion over the last 10 years, and until recently had dropped interest rates to near zero. That's a lot of cheap money going around that you can borrow and speculate with. Now, because of the actions of federal officials like Ben Bernanke, he's talking right here, people borrowed cheap money and they gambled on all sorts of assets, from old sneakers to Magic the Gathering cards to financial scams called SPACs to unprofitable firms in the stock market, private equity, yes, also crypto. Now, the Fed is really important. There's a reason that Elon Musk was worth $20 billion before the pandemic and was worth $340 billion late last year. And it's not because Tesla was selling more cars. It's because the Fed pushed up asset values during the pandemic everywhere. So in this context, cryptocurrencies are like the Florida land that no one ever intends to use. It has value in the moment it is traded, but only because there's a collective belief that it has some intrinsic worth, and because people are gambling over everything. Someone is willing to buy your crypto assets just like they were willing to buy the Florida land, even though there's really nothing there. Okay, but that's not all. There's also a politics behind crypto, and that politics is actually pretty similar to the politics of this show. It's populist. Bitcoin was created on January 3rd, 2009, right in the middle of the bailouts. And inscribed in the code of Bitcoin itself is a newspaper headline about bank bailouts. Now, it's not actual populism. It's sort of a weird kind of sort of inverted populism. But there's a broad questioning of the legitimacy of our existing order. And crypto proponents believe that the existing financial regime is a collusive arrangement between large banks supported with government power. Their view is that money laundering, tax evasion, criminal activity, and fraud are fine as long as you are an insider in the system, and the Federal Reserve and other government institutions will not only stop corrupt insiders, but will subsidize and bail them out if necessary. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to live with foreclosures, high interest rates on credit cards, high fees for middlemen in every aspect of the economy, student loans, and so on and so forth. And how could you disagree with that critique? You can't. So if you toss kind of allegations at crypto, oh, this is fraudulent, they're like, well, so is everything in finance. How dare you? But whereas the liberal democratic response, that's what I believe in, is to have the government create rules for markets. The crypto response is to build a non-government currency technology to root around this corrupt political order. And this is framed in the name of consumer choice, as in the state shouldn't be able to boss you around and tell you what you can do with your money, and neither should banks. After all, it's your money, and anyone who doesn't buy into this idea is inherently defending a set of collusive, bailout-friendly institutions that we sometimes call liberal democracy. Okay, so that's the politics of crypto. There's a reasonable point behind it. It's not one I agree with, but that's what a lot of people who are into it think. The thing is, what's become clear in this crash is that absent rules, absent this liberal democratic order that this movement disdains, crypto is just an entirely unregulated financial system prone to the same kinds of cheating, fraud, and collapse in the existing order, at least really in the pre-1930s unregulated financial system. So Twitter, for example, is full of stories like this. Here's a customer of Coinbase, one of the largest and most quote-unquote credible crypto exchanges, and he can't get his money out. Now, banks will rip you off with the fees. They'll charge you something you don't, overdraft fee or whatever, but you get your money, not crypto exchanges. Not having rules sounds great until it doesn't. Okay, and the culture of around crypto, while sort of spouting lots of words like freedom and liberty, is not good. Here's Michael Saylor, the CEO of a firm called MicroStrategy, and Saylor is or briefly became a Bitcoin billionaire. Now watch this clip and you'll see Saylor get crazier and more obviously trying to pull people into a scam.
The only use of time is, how do I buy more Bitcoin? But take all your money, buy Bitcoin, then take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin, then take all your time and figure out what you can sell to buy Bitcoin. And if you absolutely love the thing that you don't want to sell it, go mortgage your house and buy Bitcoin with it. And if you've got a business that you love because your family works for the business, it's in your family for 37 years, and you can't bear to sell it, mortgage it, finance it, and convert the proceeds into the hardest money on earth, which is Bitcoin. So what I would say is, use all your time to acquire Bitcoin, finance entities and weaker currencies to buy Bitcoin, or educate yourself on why this makes sense if you're not sure, and then educate everybody around you. If you're working for a company that's got $100 million in the treasury, you ought to convince the CEO and the board of directors to convert the treasury to Bitcoin. That's the most creative thing you can do. That'd be worth billions to them.
That guy's like an opinion leader in this space, and you can see that is a mix of a cult and a Ponzi scheme, right? Okay, so that's the culture of Bitcoin. That's writ large the culture of crypto, and Bitcoin and crypto are slightly different, but I'm lumping them in together because they're not that different. Okay, now the thing is recently the price of Bitcoin has collapsed. And there's a reason for this. It's not just, a speculator just got tired. It was prompted by the failure of two major crypto institutions because there are no rules. The first was something called Terra Luna, and the second was something called Celsius. The specific details aren't that important, but both had similar dynamics. Terra Luna and Celsius promised depositors or buyers a ridiculously high return on their money, something like 18, 20%, a number that's obviously too good to be true. And they said, oh, it's just completely safe. Then they lent out that money to speculators. And those speculators bought Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and drove the price of those cryptocurrencies up. You know what's going to happen next, right? The Federal Reserve, which has been, juicing the gambling for a decade, recently started pulling back from supporting financial assets in the last 6 months. The Fed has been like, no, things are going to go down now. So the price of Bitcoin started to drop. What happens when there's lots of people who've borrowed money to speculate? Well, the speculators can't pay back their loans. So buyers of either Terra Luna or depositors in Celsius got wiped out because those entities didn't have any money. They said, oh, your money's totally safe. It turns out it wasn't. This is an old-fashioned bank run before deposit insurance. And the collapse of these institutions had another knock-on effect, and it meant that speculators couldn't borrow. And so Bitcoin fell even more. This is how an unregulated financial system unravels. And there are more institutional blowups in the crypto world to come. Since late last year, the aggregate value of crypto has dropped from between $2 and $3 trillion to less than $1 trillion. But there's room to fall. Bitcoin is still twice as expensive as it was before the pandemic. You know, as the Fed continues to withdraw its support, there's a lot of money to be lost still. But frankly, a lot of people are going to be hurt, and that's sad, but I can't wait for this collapse to happen. It is a good thing that crypto is falling apart, because ultimately, the goal for the big investors behind crypto, not the people who are just involved and maybe made a little bit of money or lost a little bit of money, but the people who are really behind it, venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen, billionaires like Sam Bankman-Fried, is to get favorable regulation in place before the big crash so they can get bailouts from the state. And they were actually starting to succeed. Bankman-Fried had Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and Andrew Yang as guests for his crypto conference held in the Bahamas last year. And that's not all. Senators Cynthia Lummis and Kirsten Gillibrand have been key advocates to have the Federal Commodities Regulator, instead of the more hardcore Securities and Exchange Commission, regulate the industry. There was some scary stuff about Fed accounts in there as well, like kind of hinting at possible bailouts. There's even a blockchain caucus in the House, with such members as uber-partisan Democrat Eric Swalwell on the left and the Trumpiest Trump Republican Lauren Boebert on the right. Ultimately, the end game is to let crypto firms get access to taxpayer support through the Federal Reserve lending facilities or other forms of government assistance. That takes these billionaires they have billions in crypto, and it turns them into actually something useful, which are dollars. Now, people sometimes say, crypto, crypto is just belief, but what backs the dollar? That's just belief too. No, the American government backs the dollar through a lender of last resort facility, taxing authority, deposit insurance, and a strong economy that makes a lot of stuff. Crypto is actually backed purely by belief, and belief only lasts as long as prices go up. When belief goes, you need the US government to bail you out. Bankman-Fried and his people know this, and they are trying to get government backing for crypto as quickly as possible. He has spent $30 million in politics just this cycle to buy power within the Democratic Party, and says he may spend up to $1 billion in 2024. Just in politics. And one of his business, not a partisan thing, one of his business partners is a big spender on the GOP side. These guys are cynics and business people. They divided up. They said, you take the Republicans, we'll take the Democrats. Okay, so if this crash hadn't happened when it did, Bankman-Fried would likely have succeeded. The momentum was on his side. The regulators were coming to like him. So were politicians. Maybe he still will win. Maybe he won't. It's going to be much harder now that people have seen the downside of crypto. But either way, this story, like the Florida real estate story, will end in tears. But hopefully it will end soon. Thanks for watching this big breakdown on the Breaking Points channel. If you'd like to know more about big business and how our economy really works, you can sign up below for my market power focused newsletter, Big, which is in the description. Thanks and have a good one.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.